Hello, everyone. Today, my guest is the legendary parapsychologist who has 40 years of teaching parapsychology and 45 years of paranormal investigating, and has appeared on TV shows from Surviving Death, The Unexplained, Ghost Adventures, Sightings, one of my favorites, In Search of Unsolved Mysteries, The Oprah Winfrey Show, Larry King Live, The View, The Today Show, Late Night with David Letterman, and ESPN and Sports Center, which kind of makes me kind of wonder what they needed a parapsychologist on Sports Center for. But
Happy to tell you. Yeah, it was the anniversary of the John Madden football game,
Mhm,
video game, and
mhm.
apparently there's something called the Madden curse,
Oh,
and they wanted me to talk about the Madden curse. So it was kind of a fun little. It was just a very goofy piece that they put up on Sports Center. So
very cool. And also, please be sure to check out his website, Loyd Auerbach.com.
yeah.
So Lloyd, what first pulled you into the paranormal field, and what was the moment that made you want to stay in it?
Well, I've been interested in psychic phenomena. I mean, ghostly stuff, sort of, initially, but it was about ESP, it's about mind over matter stuff
Mm-hmm.
since I was a little kid. Um, I grew up, first of all, I'm kind of product of the TV generation. My dad worked for NBC, and I had a TV set in my room when I was 2. So I grew up watching shows that were in rerun at the time, like Topper and One Step Beyond and The Twilight Zone, and those kind of got me interested. But I also was a science fiction and comic book geek.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Same here.
yeah, I mean, that stuff, and I still am. So um, it just, the idea that human beings could be more than what we think we are
Mm-hmm.
is really important. And psychic phenomena is one of those things, living or dead. It was the TV show Dark Shadows in the 60s where I first heard the term parapsychology, though I read it in a Superman comic before that. And I found science books on parapsychology in the library. So that really is, I was probably about 12 or 13, and that's what really got me interested in diving into the field, was looking at the research that was being done. I mean, I've been reading books by Hans Holzer before that, but seeing that there was science to it, to all of it, was more important to me. There wasn't really one moment. I mean, I've had lots of little moments over the years, timing wise. I lucked out that there was an accredited master's program in parapsychology. I lucked out with a college when I was in college and switched to my anthropology major. And the advisor I had, his office on his shelves, he had the Journal of Parapsychology. I mean, that was unusual to begin with, but timing wise, it was perfect for me. And a number of other things that kind of have kept me increasingly in the field, and with the intention, partly because my dad's media background, with the intention of being someone who gets the word out, because the field is not well enough, parapsychology is not well enough known for what it actually is. I mean, certainly not represented by the TV show, the paranormal TV shows.
Oh yeah, that's one of the questions over here. That I seriously, when it's not one thing, it's the other. I just dropped my mouse trying to grab the sheet of paper.
Those mice try to run away all the time, you know.
Oh yeah, how do TV shows and movies help or hurt the public's understanding of paranormal?
So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I
Mm-hmm.
think that so much popular culture. In popular culture, we're talking about literature, we're talking about books, we're talking about comic books, we're talking about movies. I mean, there's a history in the history of cinema of ghost movies more than there is of the horror films. Most of the time, you have physical monsters in movies originally, or just human beings that were bad actors. But most of the ghost movies from the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty rare. Now, I'm stepping aside from vampire movies. So, ghost movies were comedies and dramas. And to this day, they still are. The majority of movies and TV shows that involve ghosts tend to be dramas or comedies. And the ghosts tend to be very human. I mean, just look at the TV show Ghosts, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect example. Ghosts are people too, in other words. And that's what the experiences that we get. And this is where our field, which goes back to the 1800s, collecting these stories, ghosts really seem to behave like people. So that part of it is very real. Unfortunately, while comedy movies may make you laugh and some
Mm-hmm.
dramas may make you cry, it's the horror films and the thrillers and things like that that cause people to be afraid and to kind of take that. It's a more of an emotional reaction. So any of the TV shows or movies that have that visceral reaction tend to be better known because the media in general, in terms of the news media and a lot of other coverage, tends to promote things that are negative. I mean, that gets our attention. In fact, the reports that come to people in parapsychology about hauntings tend to be negative. Not that there aren't positive ones. It's that why would you report, call me up and say, Loyd, we have this ghost and he's really friendly. Just want to let you know. Sometimes, and honestly, I've had cases like that, and they were calling because they wanted to know if the ghost was going to be okay. They were concerned about the ghost, not for their health, but in general. And that's a great thing because we have better investigations in those cases. But people tend to go for the fear. The paranormal TV shows, unfortunately, because they are run by producers and directors and by networks for ratings, will exaggerate through a number of means. Now, when I was back you mentioned sightings. When I was doing sightings, most of the folks I worked with on sightings in the 90s were knowledgeable enough or had spent a little time looking into the subject until we got to kind of the last season. And then myself and one of my colleagues backed away from the show. But in the 80s, for example, when I did segments for Evening Magazine and other things as well. First of all, they always wanted to shoot it. This was always during Halloween. So I'd get these calls from all these media people on Halloween in October. Secondly, they wanted to make them spooky, whether it was spooky music or we got to lower the lights. And thirdly, every once in a while, I'd have a director who was just simply assigned to the thing. And the director would say to the cameraman, hey, we've got the lights down to make it spooky. Can we turn the lights off? And the cameraman would look at me and then look at the director or whoever and just kind of like smile at me and then just very seriously say, TV is a visual medium. If we turn off the lights, we can't see anything. So it wasn't until night shot cameras came in the 90s that TV production started including those. We never included those in our investigations and still don't, because the majority of ghost experiences happen during the day, or if they happen at night, it's when the lights are on, not when it's pitch black at all.
Yeah, I love the fact that a lot of people think that spirits only come out like at night but I feel as though that if they're there, they're always around us.
Right. Well, most people don't wake up in the middle of the night unless you get older and you have to get up for other reasons. But that would be like saying, okay, so there are ghosts in your room, but you never notice them because you're asleep, because the ghosts are polite enough not to wake you up. The fact is that the shows have created their own folklore. They've created folklore. And this is, again, television. Television wanted, back in the 80s, after Ghostbusters, absolutely, producers, directors, when I was working with folks, they'd say, do you have anything that makes noise or lights up? Because TV is a visual medium and they wanted to show us using equipment. We were using environmental sensors. I've been told that I was the first person to use an EMF meter on TV.
Oh, wow.
Which is, I take the blame and the credit both, because the reality is we're using EMF meters and other sensors like temperature gauges and things like that to see what the environment is like when someone has an experience and when they don't. Is there a difference? We're not trying to detect ghosts with any of the equipment we use, because the only thing we have that will detect ghosts are living beings, people, sometimes animals, but mostly people. So technology cannot detect anything paranormal. And that's, again, a downside. But for people who manufacture that stuff, it's been a real upside. The TV shows have also brought people out of the woodwork. It's great to see more and more people interested. But we who are involved in the field, I'm the president of the board of directors of the Ryan Research Center and teach online parapsychology classes. And we'd love for people to ask us questions, not just simply take what they see on TV as reality, because it is not reality any more than Real Housewives is reality.
Oh, yeah, I agree. My friend Jonathan wants to know, has sensationalized paranormal media made us crave adrenaline over exploring our own mortality?
I think for some people that is the case. There's definitely a lot of people in the paranormal community who are thrill seekers. They're just they want to experience something. They want to go to a spooky place. They want to be scared. And that's perfectly okay as long as you're honest about it.
Yeah. that brought up my next question. I was like, how do you feel about like the gadgets that are being introduced nowadays compared to like back when you first started out,
Well,
like the
first, I
CAD
wish,
balls and REM pods and stuff?
yeah, well, it is important that people understand, take time to take those things, whether they take them apart or ask the manufacturer, or the people who put them, who sell them, a lot of questions. Because a REM pod, for example, all it really is, and somebody I know has taken one apart, is it is a cheap, inexpensive theremin kit. Theremin being a musical instrument which plays by our electromagnetic field interacting with something else that's electromagnetic. Which actually, I think I'd rather see somebody use a theremin because it creates a much better, you'd love to have a ghost play a song. That'd be kind of cool. But all it is a cheap theremin kit hooked up to lights. So instead of giving a real nice series of tones, which comes from a theremin, it's actually providing these lights that indicate something's happening. But all that says is that there's a change in the electromagnetic field. That does not say there's a ghost present.
Very true. So, how did your academic training in parapsychology influence the way that you investigate or teach the paranormal?
Well, I've certainly influenced both, as has the actual reading I've done, the research I've done myself over the years, even before I got into the field. I think in many respects, my investigative techniques and some of what I do is influenced by my cultural anthropology background too. The fact is that we deal with people's experiences, and the one thing we are clearly taught in looking at any case, you have two things happening. You have the physical environment and you have the people. If you do not have living people who tell you what is going on, or at least has happened recently, you have nothing. So there are plenty of places out in the world that have reputations for being haunted. Years ago, we had a man just pop up in front of us in the living room. Can you come and investigate? And my response is, has he shown up again since then? And the answer is usually no. I said, well, if he comes again, let us know, because he may have just shown up to say hi and left. So there's nothing to investigate. But then I'll spend time on the phone and take their information and see if I can find another explanation or understand what's going on. But we're looking, what the education in parapsychology does is it teaches you that, A, you need to know how to talk to people and listen to people. The interview process is extremely important. But then also you need to know to look at the physical environment, because human beings being human beings, we make mistakes about things that are happening. We might mistake a picture falling from the wall, which might surprise you, might have a very normal, it could happen even in a haunted place where you're seeing a ghost and the picture falls off the wall. Well, maybe the picture fell off the wall because when you freaked out when you saw the ghost, you bumped into the wall and it knocked the picture off the wall. The ghost didn't do it. You did it.
Yep.
So we have to look at each individual event that people report and look for normal explanations. We're always looking for normal first. That's something that the education teaches us. And then what's left, we might have something paranormal.
Very true. So, let's see, which was I going to bring up next? How have your personal beliefs changed since you first started investigating?
Well, as I was reading a lot of literature about all this stuff growing up, I definitely believed in ESP. I definitely believed in the ability, in the potential for mind over matter type stuff. Wasn't sure about actual ghosts, but the idea of what people call residual hauntings made a lot of sense to me also at the time. And poltergeist phenomena falls into the PK, the mind over matter stuff with living people. And I actually met people who were psychics early on, but I had a case in late 84, 85, early 85, where ultimately the only explanation that made any sense at all was that there actually was a ghost, an apparition present and communicating large amounts of information to the 12-year-old boy who was the main witness, although the other family members saw her as well. So it was one of those things that, okay, ghosts were always a possibility, that people can survive death, always a possibility. I didn't have any problem with mediums communicating possibly with somebody on the other side, but the idea of somebody sticking around was something I wasn't sure about. And that one case absolutely put me over the edge for that particular piece of it. The other thing is, I can't call it beliefs, but my knowledge range has expanded significantly, starting with that graduate education, because that's when I first started learning magic and mentalism.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm also a professional mentalist. It's not about being skeptical or debunking everything. It is about the fact that you learn the psychology behind a lot of magic and mentalism, and especially if you're a performer, you become understanding of how people misinterpret things pretty easily, or sometimes may misinterpret very complex things, and you understand why that is. It's not because people are gullible or stupid. It's other reasons. Otherwise, magicians could never fool the smartest
Mm-hmm.
people in the world. It's about the psychology of that, and that helps us again take a case that might have a lot of things going on and shrink down to, hey, this is the stuff we need to really research as paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
We have all this other stuff we can eliminate.
Very
And
cool.
that's the only way you really figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. Jonathan wants to know, in your field investigations, how often do you find that paranormal claims are actually tied to the witness's personal psychological or emotional distress?
I'd say that in most of the cases that I've had, there's at least some stuff, if they're in fear because of what they've
Mm-hmm.
experienced, whether it's paranormal or not to begin with, there is, and usually if there is a real paranormal experience that causes them fear or distress, and a lot of that distress and fear comes because they believe it's negative because of TV shows, um, then they're going to misinterpret or mislabel a lot of other stuff. So psychologically, they're open to, oh my God, this ghost is potentially dangerous, and anything that they never noticed about their house before suddenly becomes paranormal. So
Very.
a lot of the content, even in the best cases,
Mm-hmm.
this can happen. We do get calls from people who are um, emotionally disturbed, psychologically disturbed, and honestly, their description of what's going on, doesn't match any reports from the last 140 years. More like some of the stuff they read in a horror novel, or they're very paranoid about something. Sometimes it is because of very simple issues, like sometimes even prescription drug interactions can cause
Mm-hmm.
people to have experiences too. It's not just psychological stuff.
Even fever as well. I noticed that back when I had COVID, I mentioned this on my last show. But like I was running like a 103-degree fever like all day
Oh
here
yeah,
when I
yeah,
had COVID, and even then I was like, I woke up and I saw somebody that looked like something from like The Grudge or The Ring, like standing right underneath the ceiling fan. I was like, what the actual hell am I looking at? And then I realized it was a fever instead of anything paranormal going on.
yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of times, there are psychologists who will jump to diagnosing you as crazy
Mm-hmm.
or mentally disturbed, when in fact you have a drug interaction between two of the prescription drugs you're taking, or it's a fever or something. In other words, there's a lot of misinterpretation and misdiagnosis going on outside of the paranormal realm in general. There was a survey done by a realty association, I think in 2021, because some of the realtors who had sold homes right before COVID to people were hearing back from their clients that during the lockdown, they were complaining their house was haunted. And it turned out that there was that study, and there was another one that they did that people who had never been locked down or spent 24 hours a day, weeks on end in their home, were actually noticing normal stuff that houses do. But it's because they were watching paranormal TV shows, they seemed to think it was all ghostly stuff.
Oh Lord, not the paranormal shows.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that would be a different kind of paranormal realty show. So,
James wants to know, collecting data is paramount in a good investigation, but how much information do you feel is lost because of current electronics simply do not display it despite being capable of sensing it?
well, current electronics are not capable of sensing anything paranormal, anything psychic. They're not. Um, I think that what's lost, based on what I see on the TV shows, is how much information is lost because people don't do in-depth witness interviews,
Mm-hmm.
including talking to the people in the families who didn't have an experience. So that is the piece that is often lost because of the so-called methodologies you see, which are collapsed methodologies even on TV shows that are there. but the equipment, most of the equipment does some form of environmental sensing, or is gamed to pretend to do something paranormal, like the SLS camera, for example. Um, there's just nothing to. We don't know what conscious, what is being detected. We have no concept of what to detect. So, from somebody to develop a device to detect a ghost or haunting residue or things like that, you'd have to know what you're trying to detect. So, if I'm building a radio, and unbeknownst to me, I want to detect an FM station, and all I'm thinking about is the AM band, I am never going to detect an FM station because I'm not building the right thing, because I don't know what I'm trying to detect. And it may be that ghosts, we certainly think, because humans can affect these devices too. This is a part of the problem, that we have a lot of data in parapsychology that human beings can psychokinetically, usually it's unconsciously, affect electronic devices. We have data for that, for living people. So that means that potentially any effect that is anomalous may not even be environmental, may in fact be the operator who really wants some evidence. They're causing the effect themselves. It is possible for an entity, an apparition, to affect a device. But unless you have some other point of identification that there is a ghost present, like a psychic, a medium, even one of the witnesses who had the original experience saying there's somebody here, all you have is unusual things happening in the environment, or potentially you influencing the electronics.
James was just saying he's like the electronics and products of matter, so detecting something other than matter is given. I meant detecting environmental information that could show unknown anomalies.
Yeah, I think in that case, what's lost is that most of these devices do not have data loggers. I mean, I use an EMF meter that actually keeps track of the data, but it still means that as the data is being collected, you have to know the time code. What room am I in? Where am I? And you have to have a floor map as to I'm detecting something over here and need to mark that down. I think a lot of times people are more excited about the end result. The reading is going a little weird, not where it happened, when it happened, what's the baseline. I mean, when doesn't it happen? That's as important as when it does happen, to find those anomalies. So in that case, yeah.
So out of all the places you investigate, where was the most haunted place that you've been to so far?
That partly depends on whether you mean by activity or by number of ghosts.
Activity-wise or claims.
Okay. Activity-wise, the place that I saw the most activity, that we had the most activity happen, and that had the most witnesses that had seen actually physical activity, not just an apparition themselves, is a place that doesn't have much activity these days. It's called the Banta Inn. It is a bar restaurant in Tracy, California. And I started doing investigations with that there in the very late 80s and did some TV, quite a number of TV shows. In fact, I have another YouTube channel. I have a couple of YouTube channels. One of them is just simply youtube.com/Loyd Auerbach. A lot of my media appearances, so sightings and things like that. And so there's some stuff from the Banta in there. We had stuff happen on camera. Not that most of the shows tended to use it because they were afraid people were going to think it was fake, which was really funny. But we had a lot of physical activity that we witnessed, as well as fun stuff that happened because of the ghost. He was former bartender owner who was very mischievous, and we had a lot of witness stuff. So that's a cool place. The one I send people to these days is the USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum here in Alameda, California, because that has the most ghosts that I know of. So dozens of different sailors and officers who have been seen over the years.
Very cool. Jonathan wants to know can validating a witness subject experience actually help you better investigate the objective truth behind the claim?
Well, there is no objective truth. There is only subjective experience. This is where the equipment can help validate their experience, that there's something unusual in the environment, even though the equipment doesn't validate that there actually is an entity or there. I mean, the only way to really validate things is with information. So that case I mentioned a few minutes ago, this boy was getting family stories from the ghost, who grew up in the house. And I had to track down the woman's only living relative in order to validate those stories. And he did. In fact, I would start a story, he would finish it. So information that we could not have known, that have to dig for to validate, that's important stuff. And even bringing in a psychic or medium, I know some folks like to blindfold the person till they get to the
Mhm.
location. Actually, that doesn't really help, because if the location was on television, that psychic or medium might have even seen it years ago, and it's the information's there already, and they're not getting it psychically, it's coming from their memory. So we took it upon ourselves. The psychics I work with very often, I will fill them in on everything we know. So what I want to know is stuff that we don't know, that we have to dig for later on, and that's always interesting to validate.
Very cool. Another thing I learned, since what my like little long form content is like true haunted history stories and looking through the claims and trying to see what's BS and what's not BS. Here, it's at 98% of it is kind of just like hearsay from like from that, and a lot of it when it comes down to like saying Ghost Adventures or like something like that has been there. I'm just like, I'm probably not going to go over on that one.
Yeah, well, first, technically, all subjective experience is, people will trash it on that. I know the ghost hunters will talk about, we don't listen to anecdotal evidence, so why should I listen to any of the guys on Ghost Hunters who suddenly experienced something on camera? That's anecdotal evidence, right? The camera showed them reacting, but it's still subjective. But then again, everything is subjective. All of our interpretations are subjective. Anything we perceive is subjective. Emotions are subjective. We don't argue that somebody might feel angry. Prove it. Turn into the Hulk. That's about the only way I can say that that's going to prove that you have objectively are angry or rageful in some respects.
Chris wants to know, one of her favorite ideas is, if you truly felt you've experienced something paranormal, you probably did. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have felt things over the years, and I usually get asked if I actually I'm teaching right now a psychic development course for how to help people learn to be more psychic. And people ask me, well, aren't you doing that? It's like, no, and I'm not, because I'm trying to be the person who puts it all together. So I'm trying to kind of stay away from the experience. But over the years, I've been in cases where I have felt something going on, and I will turn to the psychic and very calmly say, hey, let's move around the room, and I'll eventually get them to the place where I felt something, to see if they happen to feel something also. Or I'll send them into a place that I just felt something, and I want to see if they feel something too. And it'll do that same with witnesses and other people as well, to kind of help validate my subjective experience in that way. I've certainly witnessed things, such as things in psychokinesis, people moving objects, or I work with mediums quite a bit, but I'm also president of the Forever Family Foundation. We test and certify evidential mediums. And I've seen some pretty amazing situations where they're literally, without there being deep research, and I'm not even talking about online research, the stuff that sometimes comes out of a medium's mouth, a good medium, is behavioral. So unless that grandfather of yours had a lot of YouTube videos for people to watch, they would never know how your grandfather behaved or reacted or moved around, because they've been dead for 20 years. So that kind of stuff that's validated by the living, that is valuable. But I've picked up things myself. I've had some success occasionally in remote viewing. It's pretty rare for me, but I've had experiences here and there, an out-of-body experience or two, spontaneously, things like that.
Very cool. So James wants to know again, what do you feel is more plausible, a location or object, or a person is haunted?
All right, as far as the first two, if we're talking about residual hauntings, imprints, which actually will probably be the first thing that we as human beings can actually explain in a physics way, with information theory or something else down the road. An object, there's something called psychometry, and it's something a lot of some psychics can do. People can learn. I teach this to people as well. That means holding or touching an object and getting like visions or information about who owns the object or who owned it, where has it been, things like that. A house is a big object, so a residual haunting is information in the object being a location. It's still the same thing. So it's that's very, very plausible. here's the most plausible situation for people, the one that everybody has probably had an experience with. When you're house hunting or hunting for an apartment, and you walk in, or even going sightseeing or something like that, you walk into a space, a house, an apartment, something like that, and you get a vibe. This place feels good or it feels bad. And it has nothing to do with the smell, which can turn people off, or even the decor, the way it's laid out, which can affect your perceptions too. It has nothing to do with that. You may be picking up the emotions of the people who live there, who are selling the place or have just moved out. And very often you are. That's why places with murders and things like that, real violence, people feel the emotion that seems to be imprinted. That is a haunting for that. And that building is an object. For people being haunted, I assume this means by an actual living spirit. I mean, an actual spirit. I don't think that that's terribly plausible. I can't say not plausible. It does happen where something called spirit attachment that people run into once in a while. And that's not about possession at all. Most folks who look at that think it's somebody who's died. So let's say you are an alcoholic or you are obsessive compulsive. And there's a spirit who's trying to, wandered around, just trying to see what it is being in that existence because they haven't moved on. And they were obsessive compulsive in life. And they see you. And you are obsessive compulsive. And now they can kind of glom onto you and be codependent. So they can kind of feed their obsessive compulsiveness by being around you. So we see that kind of thing. We hear about that kind of thing. That can be easily dealt with. Actually, hypnosis is a good way to deal with that. But it's pretty rare for, people ask me all the time if I'm worried about a ghost following me home or hitching a ride with me. It's like, so what? I wish I could actually communicate with them directly myself in many respects. And I have been followed a couple of times according to other people. So, and it's fine.
That question kind of brought up this next idea for me. How do you feel about animals being able to sense like paranormal? Do you believe in that sort of thing? Because my grandmother's house has like activity, like anything from like orbs and objects moving. So, but my dog, there's this one area, and it's this really thin hallway where all the bedrooms are, and the back bedroom and the den is usually where most of the orbs we capture. Some could be like classified as bugs or dust, but the ones that I see that look like an actual orb has its own light, and also it's moving with intelligence, kind of. And my dog, she, even if I have treats in my hand, she refuses to go down that one hallway, but she'll go into the den and sit up on the daybed, but she does not want to go into that hallway for whatever reason. So
animals, are like people. Every human being is psychic to some extent. We were probably much more psychic as kids. It gets educated out of us. It gets kind of drummed out of us as we grow up, which is why people have to, it's not developing, it's really redeveloping. And likely animals are as well. I mean, we have some really great cases, and there are studies with what we call animal psi or ANSI with dogs and cats and other folks and other animals. And there are cases, and they end up getting in the media quite often. They're not very common, but situations with people have to have their dog ran away and they had to move and they had to go out of town or they had to go to another state, or cats that they can't find them and it's time to move. And days or weeks later, even if they move thousands of miles away across country, that dog or cat has followed them. That kind of trailing, ESP trailing or psi trailing, happens. There are cases that have appeared in the media that have been checked out. These are real cases. Those animals have to have been psychics. Now, people will say, well, they followed the scent trail. It's like, I'm sorry. They certainly didn't follow the scent trail, because even if they followed the moving van or your car, the only way to follow that, if they knew the right scent of the car or the moving van, would be to go on the freeway or the highways. And that doesn't happen because they'd be roadkill pretty quickly. So there has to be some other more psychic explanation for that. Those kinds of things are what we look at.
very cool. Chris wants to know, has Loyd had any experience with spirits or ghosts being positive energies rather than negative as pop culture would have us believe.
Unfortunately, pop culture does the negative because, again, it's scary stuff. It causes
Mm-hmm.
reaction. The majority of our actual apparition cases. So, first, the vast majority of sightings of apparitions of ghosts by people are of a just died, maybe at the moment of death or within a few days, sometimes a week, people who you knew,
Mm-hmm.
a relative, a friend, a loved one, generally kind of saying goodbye. That's like more than 90% of the actual reported ghost cases that are out there. We don't investigate those. We take that information because those ghosts are never seen again. But those are certainly not negative ghosts at all, negative in any sort of way. I mean, maybe you didn't like your mother and she showed up anyway. That kind of thing can happen. In the ones that seem to be longer term, it's incredibly rare for anything negative to be there. And it's more about, sometimes it's about neutral, I won't say energy, but neutral people, neutral entities. It depends on whether they like you or not. And frankly, well, I don't think there are a lot of evil people in the world. They tend not
Mm-hmm.
to stick around, but bullies sometimes do.
Mm-hmm.
And a-holes definitely do.
Oh,
So
please, no sugarcoating. You can
yeah.
feel free
Okay.
to
So,
curse.
and let's call an asshole an asshole. Some there are people just simply were not people you wanted to be around when they were alive. They were negative when they were alive. They're negative now that they're dead. And so, if they and we have cases occasionally where the entity, the apparition will say, "Well, people move into the house. It's like get out of my house. This is
Mm-hmm.
my house." It's like, dude, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
Move on. No, this is my house, and there can be argument, and that can be considered negative, but it's certainly not like a horror film where suddenly the ghost is going to start attacking people or that sort of thing. That doesn't happen.
James wants to know is, do you think that things like mirrors or can be like the gateway tapes, stuff like that, I'm not going to butcher that K word right there, but he wants to know if you think that those can actually help a person to have experiences that are
I am not.
paranormal.
I'm actually not familiar with either one of those. So yeah, so I can't say. I will tell you that that we have a lot of data that shows that being in an altered state of consciousness, so meditators tend to be more open psychically.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways to be more open psychically, and there are sound. Sound is a way. Music and sound are ways to get into an
Mm-hmm.
altered state. There's things like binaural beats that can put people in altered states as well. Hemisync technology. So it really depends on the state you're trying to get into, and almost anything can help you open up as long as you're willing to be open to that sort of thing.
So that kind of brings me up to my next idea for a question. Do you feel as though that maybe meditating, like when you're investigating, could help like open up a chance for like something to come through and connect with you?
Possibly, yeah, yeah. Assuming there's something there to begin with.
Very cool.
One of the things I do want to make mention is that with residual hauntings, you don't have to worry about. You may have to be more open to sensing it
Mm-hmm.
yourself, but they're in the environment, so it doesn't matter, what you ask for because it's still there. With apparitions, with conscious beings who are dead, there's an assumption that they're going to be there when you go, and that's not true. I mean, if and this speaks to sometimes the shows where people are provoking or trying to do that. And honestly, if I was a ghost when somebody was yelling at me, I'd probably just leave. I'd step out for a little while, make sure they get nothing,
Mm-hmm.
and because I don't want to deal with them, or I might want to whack them upside the head if I could. But of course, then if I did that, I get labeled as a demon right off the bat.
So how do you feel about that? Was going to be my next guess. What do you think on demons? What is your take on it?
The idea of demonic entities, the way people describe them, tends to come from biblical mythology, doesn't fall into science. God does not fall into science at all. We
Mm-hmm.
cannot detect God or gods, supernatural beings in that sense. And we have not seen evidence of those kinds of entities. However, human beings, on occasion, certainly living human beings, can certainly act demonically,
Mm-hmm.
really can be bad actors. Fortunately, most of the people who are murderers, who are really truly violent, do not stick around. It does not seem that those people stick around as ghosts after death for that. But we don't deal with demons, angels, and I usually have to ask when somebody asks what is it a demon? It's like, define a demon. What do you think a demon is? I often have psychics who will say, I meet psychics who say, well, I can communicate with angelic beings. Tell me what that means to you. Do you mean, beings created by God who are, messengers of God? Or are you talking about really, really good ghosts or spirits who are seemingly so good that they seem angelic in behavior? And usually it's the latter. They're not actual angels. They're just people who act nice. We're dead.
So, how do you feel about past life regression? Are you a believer into that sort of thing?
I wrote a book which is available still on Kindle format and Nook format called Reincarnation, Channeling, and
Mhm.
Possession. In parapsychology, in our world, in science, the cases we deal with for reincarnation, which are, I'd say the majority of those kinds of cases are handled by the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. They've been doing this work since 1960, working with children, typically 2 to 4 years old, who spontaneously remember previous lives and can give detail. Past life regression hypnosis is a problem. When it's used therapeutically, it is a really, really good brief therapy form. It works very well for therapy. It does not work as evidence for reincarnation. And the main reason is because we cannot figure out a way to eliminate the possibility that all the information you're giving us is because of stuff you read when you were growing up or as an adult. It's information you're already exposed to. It can only be seen as a metaphor. And most of the time, people can't come up with, except for remembering famous people, they can't come up with enough detail to make it seem that it's unlikely that you ever would have encountered this information. So as an example, a colleague of mine, Kerry Gaynor, who works as a hypnotherapist, he's a parapsychologist, and he's done thousands and thousands of past life regressions. And years ago, he mentioned to me that while people are being regressed, and very often they're doing that because they want to know about a past life, or they want some help with some, like, why am I afraid of things? And he will ask them questions. So let's say the person goes back and thinks they were a farmer in the south of France in the 14th century. He asks questions like, what'd you eat? What was your daily diet? Where'd you poop? Very, very mundane. Where'd you get your food? Very mundane questions that he would certainly not know the answer to. And then he might go to the UCLA library, because he used to be on staff there, and do some historical research and see if those mundane details, which would never make it into a movie or the average novel at all, or even a history book, if that was right. And he said maybe 1 in 500. So it's
Very
not good
cool.
evidence for us.
Yeah, that's funny. I always just do this random, just jokefully, just to see what one of the debunkers would say. But every now and then here at the house, when I'm like the only one at the house and everything, I've heard what sounds like someone like with a smoker's hack, like a female with a smoker's hack, coughing from the back bedroom. And my house is in the middle of nowhere. Nearest neighbor, give or take, maybe 125 feet away, like through a patch of woods on all four sides of the house. And and there's like no like reason for there to be anything like coughing or anything. Well, at least I didn't think that there was a reason for anything to be coughing. So I asked the debunker what could cause it. He's like, well, first of all, where are you? I'm like, I'm in the middle of nowhere pretty much. And then he's like, well, depending on where that is, it could be possibly a spirit, or like if you like lived in the city, it was more than likely one of your neighbors. So how do you feel about people capturing phantom sounds on like during an investigation? Is that a rare occurrence? Is where I'm trying to get
Well,
to.
first, I have to say that person's not a debunker. If they were a
Yeah.
debunker, they wouldn't ever mention spirit at all.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this is a sidebar here. The TV shows, especially Ghost Hunters, made it seem like debunking is what you do when you explain something. That's not debunking. The word debunk refers to fraud. Somebody's debunking is a fraud, is trying to lie to you. So You are explaining or looking for alternative explanations, which is the process of science. The capturing of occasional odd sounds and things like that. First of all, you have to make sure that that was a human sound,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to something else that might have been a creak or something that sounded like a cough.
Mm-hmm.
If you're capturing it on tape, on some sort of recording, and that. Now, hearing that, and I will say that residual hauntings, when people pick them up, they can be almost anything. I had a case years ago, not too long ago, it was a few years, right before COVID. This family had moved into a house. The previous owner was an older woman. Her son, after she died, her son sold the house to these new people. And this back bedroom, which is one of the kids' bedrooms, the kid kept seeing this old woman and boxes, like lots of boxes that were not physically there, but hearing her voice also on occasion. And that's because of residual haunting. There are instances of things that make no sense to be the voice of a spirit beyond just a cough. So if there was a residual haunting of a woman coughing, typically you would never get it on audio, but there are instances where that sometimes happens. A friend of mine years ago told me about a place called the Butler Peters Plantation,
Mm-hmm.
which is outside of Knoxville. And there's a basement area apparently, which it's a plantation, it's a restaurant, or it was a restaurant. I don't know if it's still open, but there was a room in the basement where the plantation owner back in the 1800s used to punish slaves,
Mm-hmm.
and even torture them. And at one point, historically, there was the guy got loose. A bunch of other slaves came. There were gunshots. There's actually, at the time, there were still bullets in the door. They were using it as a little tourist attraction down there.
Mm-hmm.
And John was before Halloween, they were doing this. This is 20 some odd years ago. He was with a disc jockey about 2 weeks before Halloween using two different recorders. They had an analog cassette tape recorder and a digital audio tape recorder that they were using at the time. There wasn't an actual digital recorders otherwise. And John was doing, they were trying to see if they would have an experience.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happened. But the next day, the DJ calls him back and says, "You're not going to believe this." And he plays this tape for John, his DAT tape. And on that tape, but not on John's, mind you, there is a sound of men yelling, screaming, gunshots. Gunshots are not, that's not a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
That is a recording somehow of the past that was imprinted on the tape somehow. The how might have been through the mind of one of the two people there without realizing it. We can't really say at this point, but I've heard other things like that too.
I never did manage to capture the Phantom Coffee on audio, and I left my tablet running for the sound recorder while I went to town. So I went there, came back, and it was pretty much an hour and 21 minutes of my cat and dog chasing each other around the house. Nothing happening, but I do have this one incident that happened during a live stream that I can actually email you the sample of. I was sitting over here talking with one of my friends, and I was the only one home at the time. My mom was taking dinner down to my grandmother's house because she's elderly and she wanted some food. So she went down there, and I was talking with one of my friends on a live stream about what got him interested in writing the paranormal stuff like that. And out of this side of my room over here where the window is, I hear a plain as day whistle sound. I was like, and you could tell that I wasn't aware of it because I was just sitting over here going, did you just hear that sound? It's like, what sound? I was like, I just heard a whistle plain as day over here. And he's like, is somebody trying to get your attention? I'm like, I'm the only one here, man. So
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I was at a place I've been to many times before, the Moss Beach Distillery restaurant, which has a friendly ghost, and she's been around for decades, and she has traveled a little bit here and there. She's been seen at other places too. After we gave her travel directions that she could do that. But anyway, I was with a psychic friend of mine. She communicated with her before we had lunch. We sat down for lunch. We were downstairs, and I was talking to her on a digital audio recorder. It was taping. There's a little interview about her experience talking to the ghost and what it was like. And all of a sudden, and we were the only ones in this indoor patio. There was no one on the outdoor patio. It was in the middle of the week, off season, very few people even
Mhm.
upstairs in the restaurant. And I heard, "Hi, Loyd," nice, beautiful female voice off to my left, about 2 feet from my left. And again, 3 feet from my left was a glass window, glass door. So nobody there. She looked up and said, "Hey, did she say something to you?"
Mhm.
She didn't hear what it was, but Ankasha heard that there was a voice. And then when we played back the tape, there was nothing. When people have an experience of a ghost, regardless of what it is, it's all a
Mhm.
psychic experience. It's not an actual physical experience.
Mhm.
Because ESP means non-sensory, extra sensory. It's
Mhm.
not a sense.
James wants to know: have you ever read any of the works of Alan Kardec?
I
Kardec.
have. I definitely have. There's some really interesting stuff. Kardec, of course, um, slightly diverged from spiritualism, which was all happening at the same time in the latter part of
Mhm.
the 19th century. And Spiritism is an important thing in the world. In fact, a huge percentage of the Brazilian population
Mhm.
are Spiritists. Besides being Catholics, they're both Catholic and Spiritists. Probably the country with the most mediums or people who can do mediumship per capita because of Kardec's work and the impact it had on Brazilians and other places. I think that's Brazil. So Kardec stuff is really interesting. The Spirit book, and I think
Mhm.
there's also one called the Seance book, and I've read them both over the years. I've got copies of them here. You can find them on Amazon still, and they're definitely worth a read, especially around. Even though he doesn't use the phrase near death experience, that stuff is talked about. Certainly,
Mhm.
OBEs are talked about there. Astral projection.
Ryan wants to know: what was your first experience?
You mean besides knowing who was on the phone when somebody was calling me before caller ID? Because that probably was my first psychic experience. I'd say my first personal experience. I had experiences with psychics, having readings and watching psychics and having some really interesting stuff when I was in college. But it was actually my first semester as a grad student in 1979. My very very first case, actually. We were another student and I were investigating a case of seeming poltergeist case with physical activity, but also the woman who had called had seen a man in black armor
Mhm.
appear at the foot of her bed, which is really bizarre for Northern California.
Mhm.
And we were up there to do the investigations. We did an interview with the woman and her 16-year-old daughter. There were two older daughters who were they had moved out of the house. They were still in the area, but they moved out of the house. There was a fraternal twin brother to the 16-year-old girl who was basically a juvenile delinquent,
Mhm.
and he was in juvie hall essentially. So he wasn't home for a while, and he was not home all the time that they were seeing this. That she had seen the Black Knight. The 16-year-old girl had seen the Black Knight once or twice, but for the most part, it's the mother. But then they talked about all the physical stuff that was going on. And we're going to go upstairs because the Black Knight appeared in one of the bedrooms. And as we're about to go to the stairs and walk up this pretty tall downstairs ceiling and with pretty
Mhm.
high stairs, for whatever reason, I felt like I needed to go past the woman. It's like something was pulling me. And I went up the stairs, walked into a bedroom because she didn't describe what bedroom it was. I just walked into this bedroom and stood in a spot at the foot of one of this bed. And she came to the door with her daughter and she did this. That's where he appears, very dramatically. I don't know why I went there because, as it turned out, there was no ghost there. There was, however, actual activity. We had enough corroboration of things happening, including from the older daughters. But the Black Knight this was a poltergeist case. Normally, people talk about teenage girls, and there was a 16-year-old girl, but it was actually the mother who was psychologically set to be the poltergeist agent.
Mhm.
And part of that was she was creating this image in her mind of why her son that some evil influence was making her son a bad guy. I mean, he grew up without a father. Tom and I found, looking around and under the house in the crawl space, we found toy swords and shields and other stuff because the kid played knight in shining armor as a
Mhm.
kid. So that kind of fit into the whole Black Knight thing as
Very
well.
cool. Do we have time for one more question over here?
Sure.
Before, all right. Chris wants to know: have you ever had any experience with phantom scents, like cigar smoke and like roses and stuff like that?
Yes. My very first, what I would now consider looking back on it, my very first apparition experience, ghostly experience, was visiting with one of my magician buddies, with
Mhm.
another magician. We were at this guy Bill's apartment. He had moved over the 20 years before, he had moved 5 times. This is after his wife died. He's an older guy. And he owned nothing that belonged to the two of them, that belonged to her, other than some jewelry. And as we're talking about it, he was talking about his experiences with her being around. He said that every once in a while he feels her and he smells her perfume. And he's talking. All of a sudden, Mike and I start smelling this perfume. And Bill like sniffs the air. And he says, "Yeah, that's her." And we stand up and we're kind of smelling it. And then it starts moving around. So we actually start, 3 guys sniffing the air and following a moving scent around. There are a lot of other olfactory apparitions on record. And then I had a situation a week and a half after my friend Martin Caden, who was a science and science fiction writer who could do psychokinesis. He actually created the $6 Million Man through his book Cyborg, that TV show. Worked in media, was a consultant at NASA. He died. He had claimed he was going to come back to haunt me, and I was disappointed that nothing had happened for a week and a half. But a week and a half later, I'm driving my 2-month-old, maybe 3-month-old car, which still smelled new, to the Oakland airport very early in the morning, very little traffic driving through Oakland to get to the airport. And all of a sudden, my car fills up with a smell, but no smoke, of stinky cigar smoke. And it was definitely his brand. And I also felt like there was a presence in the seat next to me.
Very
And
cool.
I talked to him for a couple of minutes, then it went away. And I flew up to Portland, Oregon before I left the airport, picked up, it was a payphone time, called a pilot friend of Marty's who knew him really well in New Jersey. And before I could say anything, he started telling me that he was just flying his Cessna and his cockpit filled up with the smell of the cigar smoke. He had the exact same experience. And so did another pilot friend in Florida. Mine happened at 7 a.m. Pacific time, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Bob's happened at 10:10 Eastern time, and the other guy, John, at 10:20. And over the next few weeks, Bob found out that 25 of us had the same experience in a
Oh
car,
wow.
plane, when we were flying. So all with the smell of the cigar smoke, all with the sense of presence. So those things do happen.
That's really cool. So we have already reached the hour mark, and I know you probably got things to do, like this evening. I just wanted to say thank you very much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to come on my show. It's been an absolute honor to have you on here,
Thanks.
and hopefully we can do this again sometime if you will be
Sure.
interested.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and, as you can hear, my dog's getting ready to go out. So I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. I just wanted to say thank you very much again for coming on.
You're welcome, Michael. All right. Take care.
You too. Nice to meet you again.
Bye.
Bye.